Good evening, friends. Welcome to this webinar. So on behalf of ASSOM, it's my pleasure to welcome LG sir from Singapore, Dr. Ram Gopalakrishnan and Dr. Yamuna Devi from Apollo Chennai, who have taken time from their busy schedule to be with us for this webinar. I believe the latest news is probably Singapore has extended its lockdown till the end of May. We are not sure how long our lockdown would continue. Hopefully, post 3rd of May, once the lockdown is lifted, we will start our operations in a phased manner. We will be going with the plan A, that is, the staff would be split into 3 groups and we will be working each group 2 days consecutively. We have formulated some SOP and both for the OP and the OT functioning. This webinar will help clarify some of our doubts and help us to finalize this SOP. So hopefully we all have a very fruitful meeting, and I now request Dr. Muna Madam and Dr. Shanta Madam to take over the discussions.
Hello everyone and good evening, and can you hear me?
I can hear you well.
Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Yes, very much.
Yeah. Okay, so today's webinar is basically planning for post-lockdown SN getting back to work. In response to the mail sent by Dr. Girish, we had responses from 117 employees, and thank you so much for the interest and enthusiasm. And hopefully we'll do justice to most of them for the next 90 minutes. The pre-webinar prep has already been sent to most of you. Those who have not got it will get it again. A PPT from Dr. Ram Gopalakrishnan regarding managing OPD in the COVID era. A PPT from Dr. Yamuna Devi regarding some OT protocols, especially air circulation and anesthesia related. And as of today, we have the Indian guidelines, the preferred practice patterns for ophthalmology practice during the pandemic, of which Shankar Nethralaya was also a part. We have 3 panelists today. Dr. Ram Gopalakrishnan, who's our go-to person for anything and everything related to infection. And he's a senior consultant in the Institute of Infectious Diseases, Apollo Hospitals, Chennai. We have Dr. Yamuna Devi Ramanathan, who's an enviable combination of an anesthetist, a microbiologist, and a certified infection control specialist. She's an associate consultant and an infection control officer in Apollo Main Hospitals, Chennai. Welcome, Dr. Ram and Dr. Yamuna. And our very own Dr. Lingam Gopal, LG sir, who's a teacher and mentor to almost everyone in SN and innumerable ER surgeons worldwide. He's currently Associate Professor and Senior Consultant in National University Health System, Singapore. So we will divide today's session into 3. The first session will be common general questions related to COVID, which will be addressed to Dr. Ram Gopalakrishnan. The second section will be related to OT and anesthesia protocols and sub-lab related issues to Dr. Yamuna Devi. And the third section, ophthalmology related practice, will be taken for Dr. Lingam Gopal, and Shanta will be organizing that. During the course, you may type in your questions in the chat box and we'll take them at the end if there's time. So I'll start with the question that probably everyone is asking, the crystal ball question to Dr. Ram Gopalakrishnan. When do you think we will be able to start regular work, including elective surgeries?
Okay, so at the outset, thank you for inviting me. And I'm by no means an expert on COVID. I request Dr. Yamuna and Dr. LG, who has seen a lot of this in Singapore, to pitch in whenever they want to correct me if I go wrong, especially in terms of ophthalmologist practice. So when do I see this ending? I don't think it's ever going to end. That's a pessimistic answer. But what we will see is a gradual easing of restrictions, but there is a new normal now. We can't go close to our patients anymore. We can't just, for instance, you can't do your slit lamp examinations the way you used to. Things have completely changed. In the future, every single patient will have to be thought of as possibly COVID positive. It's just like before the HIV era and after the HIV era. Every time you operate, you now have to protect yourself as if the patient may be HIV positive, whether positive or not. So our behavior will have to dramatically change in the long term. So it's best to move into those changes as correctly and as scientifically as possible.
Thank you. And another question, the role of pre-operative testing, especially for elective cases, and does it need special government permission now in the current year?
Yeah, as if you look at the ICMR guidelines now, as of today, there is no role for routine pre-operative testing. You can't do it. You can only do it for symptomatic patients or contacts or healthcare workers. So when you fill out the form that you order to do the test, you are going to have a problem. What are you going to fill out? Because you can't say pre-op testing. So either you will have to fudge that form or the form will be rejected. The second issue is pre-op testing necessary, assuming that you have the capacity to do it? Now, I would certify to you that if you are going to be in a situation where your infection control measures are exactly the same, whether you're COVID positive or COVID negative, and if the test is not going to make a difference, then you should just go ahead with every case as if they are COVID positive. Now, I'm not talking about symptomatic patients, anybody with fever, cough, sore throat. Those patients should never come into an ophthalmology setup, let alone go through surgery. I'm talking about a totally asymptomatic, for instance, cataract surgery, elective cataract surgery. Now, we know that the test picks up only about 60 to 70% of patients. We know that for sure. So it's going to miss 30 to 40%. So if you look at the guidelines, they are the same whether COVID test was sent or test was negative. The only thing is you can have some reassurance with a COVID negative test, but it doesn't take away the need to follow protection for all cases as if they are positive.
Thank you. And now antibody testing or rapid testing for the healthcare worker. A lot of people have asked this question. And for which group is it necessary and what does it mean? How do you interpret it?
Yeah, first of all, practically the antibody testing kits are not available to the private sector. They are only available with the government sector. Secondly, current government guidelines are exclusively for epidemiological purposes. In other words, they will do sero surveys of, say, contact or rings around index cases to see how many have been picked up in asymptomatic manner. Again, ICMR has emphasized today that do not do these tests for clinical purposes, because these tests, for two reasons, there's a lot of false negativity. They will invariably be negative after 7 days and even after, before 7 days, and even after 7 days when you would expect an antibody response, they are frequently negative. And we don't know whether, if you have IgM or IgG by the rapid methodologies, whether they are actually protective or not. So we can't even use these tests right now to tell a healthcare worker, you've already been infected, you're immune, you can go back to work. So as of now, please don't use these serology tests. Things will become much clearer after 2 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, I think thank you so much. I'm sure a lot of us are clear on this issue. And the next one is HCQ prophylaxis, that I'm sure you're asked this question every day. So
yes, I'm asked this several times a day actually. Please don't take HCQ. The only people who actually, there is no scientific basis to ICMR putting out a recommendation saying take HCQ. No other country in the whole world, not the US, not Europe, not Italy, which is full of COVID, recommends HCQ to its healthcare workers. The drug has toxicities. Trials are underway to see whether it works. ICMR has put out this. And I would recommend that if you are a full-time intensivist taking care of COVID patients for 12 hours a day in the ICU, putting on your PPE, then yes. And if you don't have underlying sugar, BP, heart problems, then yes, you should take that. Definitely not for ophthalmologists as far as healthcare workers go.
And maybe a comment on BCG and antivirals in the management of COVID?
Very simple comment. There is no antiviral that works for COVID as of April 21st. That's been proven to work. A lot of anecdotal studies, a lot of excitement, but nothing that is proven to work. No drug is officially approved in any country for the treatment of COVID. That should change. Hopefully, there's a drug called Remdesivir, which is available in the US, which sounds very promising. Hydroxychloroquine, there are enough negative studies now. So just watch this space. That's all I can say. And the role of ECG, you are asking? correct?
BCG vaccine.
BCG, no. BCG is another. See, we all love to think BCG might work because it's cheap. It's given to everybody in this country. If that were the case, this country should not have any COVID at all because we all get BCG vaccinated in childhood. So trials are ongoing. Please wait for the trials.
Okay, and now a question that perplexes most of us. If you have a non-COVID related respiratory illness like a cough or a cold or something, how do we manage such patients and staff?
At the moment, unless you do a test for COVID, you won't know whether it's COVID or an ordinary flu or just any ordinary respiratory infection, unless you test for COVID. So if you've done a test for COVID, you can say with 60% certainty that it's not COVID, assuming the test is negative. But there is a 30 to 40% chance it could still be COVID. And you don't want to pick up those respiratory viruses from that patient as well. So whatever we need to do for COVID will prevent those as well. So I would suggest if your patient on the phone says, I have fever, cough, respiratory issues, don't see that patient for any elective eye issue. Just see them only for emergencies or urgencies, whether you do COVID testing or not.
Okay, and now you have patients or healthcare workers who come from hotspots and containment zones. Now, how do we deal with those patients?
So
the patients and the healthcare workers.
Yeah, in Chennai, we are all in a hotspot, so it applies to all of us. So the question is, are they taking care of COVID patients or not? If they're taking care of COVID patients, they should be using the full PPE. If they're doing that, then there is no issue at all. That is not considered a COVID exposure. The issue arises is when somebody who is not supposed to be taking care of COVID patients accidentally sees a COVID patient. And so what we factor in, just like a needle stick exposure in HIV, is the three factors. One is, was the index patient wearing a mask? Were you wearing a mask? What was the duration of the close contact? Several numbers, including some Singapore guidelines, suggest that it should be about 15 minutes. If the patient was wearing a mask, you were wearing a mask, and you were with the patient for less than 15 minutes, which is kind of a typical physical exam history encounter, then it is classified as a low risk exposure, which is essentially nothing. You can go back to work with self-monitoring, no quarantine, nothing. Anything more, if the patient wasn't wearing a mask and you weren't wearing a mask, the level of risk progressively increases. So if you suspect a COVID exposure, just call the appropriate person. We will grade the risk just like a HIV needle stick exposure and advise action.
Yeah, a lot of our colleagues have asked questions. What happens if you have a family member working in a COVID unit?
Tell your family member to follow all appropriate PPE. If they go in the morning to work, wear on their full spacesuit. If they're taking care of COVID patients, they discard the spacesuit and come home. There is no risk to that healthcare worker and to you. Just normal, whatever they were doing before Corona came out, they need to continue.
No need to self-isolate.
Absolutely not. Self-isolation is only needed when there is a COVID exposure, which is a breach of protocol. If you're gone to a COVID room without wearing PPE, for instance.
Can I share my personal experience about exactly what Dr. Ram Gopal was telling about low risk exposure? There was about 30 days back, I saw one patient who has no specific problem. I spent maybe about 8 minutes or 9 minutes with the patient at the most. And about 13 days after the interaction with the patient, there was a call from the Ministry of Health saying that she has turned COVID positive and who all she has interacted with were traced. And I was one of the doctors who examined her. So then the department took a decision for me to stay home for 2 days, which is by 15th day, of course, the quarantine period is over. So they asked me to stay home, but they said ultimately it's only low risk, so there's no problem at all. Because of what you said, less than 15 minutes of exposure, and she was wearing a mask, I was wearing a mask, and I didn't do any international procedure. So low risk is not a big issue, really.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Yamuna, would you like to comment on that?
Dr. Yamuna, your microphone is off, I think.
Mic is off. Yeah.
Yeah. Am I connected now?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Yeah. There is a, as per scientific reason and also by different guidelines and recommendation, it clearly says if the healthcare worker is adhering to a proper PPE, there is no need for quarantining themselves, even if they come in contact with a suspected or a positive COVID patient.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Now, Dr. Ram, I have a question to you. We have patients who are on steroids and immunosuppressives, both for ophthalmic and non-ophthalmic reasons. What happens to them? Do we have any special protocols for them?
Yeah.
With ophthalmic reasons, do we change the treatment?
Right. First of all, the obvious thing, if somebody develops proven COVID, asymptomatic, symptomatic, severe, obviously you are going to stop your immunosuppression. So that's obvious. So what do you do in patients who are at risk? I mean, they don't have any symptoms, they're perfectly well, but on biologics. The answer is just continue the biologics, advise them to strictly reverse quarantine themselves. If you're immunosuppressed, you should be extra strict with lockdown. You should have as few contacts as possible. You should take extra care with avoiding anybody who might bring in COVID to you. That's all. The third category is those in whom you're planning to start these biologics. For instance, if you have somebody with a bad eye condition which requires steroids or biologics, if you can get by for a month or two with less aggressive therapy, it is suggested you do that, unless of course it's vision threatening, etc. So that's a general guideline across most specialties.
And there was a question on asymptomatic carriers, which is, I think, the category that everyone is worried about. Does a mask suffice on both sides to protect you from an asymptomatic carrier?
Absolutely. A mask completely suffices, but in addition, you need a 2-meter distance between you and the patient. And if you go closer than 2 meters, you'll have to protect your eyes. You have to wear a basic face shield, mask for the patient, mask for yourself, and scrupulous hand hygiene. Even if you wear gloves, before you put on the gloves, hand hygiene. After you remove the gloves, hand hygiene. Because the concern is you might touch something and then touch your mucous membranes yourself instead of coming from the patient.
Okay. And these are questions basically at the end of work when you go home or when you go shopping for yourself and for your family. What are the protocols you need to follow in terms of disinfection?
If you're an ophthalmologist, nothing. Just shop as much as you want, go home, wash your hands after you go home. Okay, that's all you need to do because you are not taking care of COVID patients. Whatever you do when you go into the community, you should do. We all should wear a mask. We all should wash our hands frequently. We should practice cough etiquette. That's it. So that's all you need to do as far as ophthalmologists go. Because you don't take care of COVID patients actively. From community, you can get it, but just wear a mask, stay 2 meters away, don't be close together and queues, what the general public is doing.
Okay, and there was a question because a lot of employees use public transport. So what are the precautions as and when public transport is re-established?
Yes, public.
Currently,
That's an important question because a lot of your staff would be coming on public transport. This really is a concern because public transport, people tend to be jammed together in small crowded areas. A few practical suggestions. One is leave the seat next to you vacant. That's just a practical suggestion. Probably if you have a bus, 1 person per seat. I know it's going to be a logistical issue, but then you will also, fewer people per day will be coming. You're planning to work in shifts, right? So perhaps you could implement that. Second, try not to use the AC on the bus. I know it's going to be terrible in April and May, but natural ventilation is a simple way to reduce this risk. Thirdly, mask for all. Before you get into the bus, you need to mask up. And you shouldn't take it off till you get off the bus. And again, you need to put it on when you get into the hospital. So any confined area, you need to mask up. And obviously, simple things like cough hygiene, cough into your elbow rather than into your hand, use of handkerchiefs, etc. Whatever the general public should be doing.
and then there's a lot of queries on footwear contamination. So what is the ideal footwear that you would use?
The ideal footwear is whatever you were doing before Corona days. You want to wear high heels, you can wear them. If you want to wear canvas shoes, you can wear them. See, what kind of footwear is contaminated by Corona? If you are working in a COVID unit, an ICU full of Corona patients, and you walk in with your shoes, for instance, then yes, Corona can deposit on your shoes, and you have to clean out your shoes before you leave. So that's why shoe covers are needed in that setting. As ophthalmologists, you should not come into contact with COVID patients ever. So just wear your regular footwear. Obviously, we're going to do surgical procedures, which Yamuna will cover. You will need to cover your shoes, but not for routine outpatient care.
Okay. And finally, we have proposed different gear at the workplace and at home when we do go back to work. And I think Dr. Girish would have shared the
Yes.
with you. Do you have
Yes,
a comment on that?
I saw that. That is, to my mind, it's an overkill. I just go in my regular dress to work and I cover up with a gown and gloves if I need to. If I go into the COVID ward, I still cover up and go in. So I don't think we should get swayed by what people in an American or an Italian ICU are going through. That's a totally different setup. That is a very high risk setup. You're an ophthalmologist going to work, doing ophthalmology care. I think your regular dress is more than enough. If you choose to shift to scrubs, that's fine. But it's really what transmits this is person to person. So it's that distancing, mask on the patient, mask on your face, and scrupulous hand hygiene. You can change all the dress you want, but if you examine a patient, say do a slit lamp exam, and then don't do the hand hygiene afterwards, and then casually rub your eye or pick your nose, then there's no point in changing the dress. So it's hand hygiene, hand hygiene.
Dr. LG, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, see, what we switch to scrubs in NUH is only for one reason, that it's easy to wash every day when you come home. Only for that reason we change to scrubs. Otherwise, you can wear your routine dress. We are not wearing any surgical gown on top of it for examining a patient in the clinic. We go with the usual dress, usual footwear, and examine the patients. So scrubs we are switched to only for this reason. It's easy to change and wash every day without, you don't need to iron it because it's made of a special cloth, and then only for convenience. That's all. And I don't think you need to take out OT dress from inside the OT and use it in the clinic. Maybe if you have excess OT dresses, maybe you can do that, I suppose. But you can go with your usual dress, whatever you're wearing, no problem.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ram. I think, but we'd like you to hold on for the next set of questions. I think
Sure.
you've cleared a lot of doubts, and I think a lot of us are feeling a little more comfortable now. I'll go on to Dr. Yamuna Devi. Can you switch on your mic, Dr. Yamuna? There were questions from the anesthesia team regarding air exchanges for OPD and OT and the engineering controls, the temperatures, the humidity settings. I've known you shared a PPT, but could you just briefly tell us about that?
Yeah, sure, ma'am. The problem with most of the OPs which we have nowadays is all centralized AC. And in a centralized air conditioning unit, the amount of fresh air exchange which happens is hardly 2 to 3. It is not more than that. And this amount of ventilation or this amount of air exchange as such in the centralized AC cannot be changed. So if we want to have a proper air exchange, we need to get more of fresh air exchange, which can happen only if we keep the windows open. If we have a provision of window sitting in the OP areas, it's better to keep it open. Otherwise, we cannot increase the number of air exchanges in the OPD. So to avoid the air contamination happening inside the OP area, the only best thing is engineering controls not possible. Second best thing is PPE, that is personal protective equipment. Put a mask on the patient's face and a mask also on the healthcare worker. So that would actually reduce the air contamination. Social distancing in the OP area is what actually going to help us out. Second thing about the OT. There was also a question about should we create a negative pressure room inside the OT area. If you have a separate holding area in the OT where the anesthetist can anesthetize the patient, either it's a general anesthesia or a local anesthesia, if you can create that room into negative pressure room, if it is possible, you can do it. Otherwise, you can continue with your anesthesia procedure within the same OT without changing the pressure. You can continue with positive pressure, limit the number of people standing inside the OT, not more than 2, the anesthetist and the anesthesia technician. So during intubation, the recommended guidelines are you go with a rapid sequence induction, put a BV filter or a HME filter between the respiratory circuit and the face mask of the patient, and reduce the time for pre-oxygenation procedure. the laminar flow or the number of air exchanges in the OT, as far as our NABH is concerned, it is around 20 air exchanges. So if it is a 20 air exchanges room, by the time any aerosol generating procedure happens, it gets cleared within a period of 15 minutes. So by the time the anesthetist intubates, fixes the tube, within a period of 15 minutes, that entire area, whatever aerosol has produced, it's cleared out because the air exchange is so fast that it gets cleared out. Then the surgical team can actually enter into the OT. During the procedure, anyhow, you are going to put a BV filter or a HME filter in the circuit. So the chances of aerosolization from the patient into the atmosphere is also less. And second important protection is the people, the surgical team, the anesthesia team, they can protect themselves by wearing appropriate PPE like N95 mask and face shield. So all these three things, right from your engineering control, anesthesia level control, and personal protective equipment control, the aerosolization report, I mean the danger or the risk of transmission would definitely come down.
There was a question on preoperative testing in case of an aerosol generating procedure like general anesthesia. Would we recommend preoperative COVID testing or no?
Ma'am, as already Dr. Ram Gopal Krishnan sir mentioned, we go first with the clinical suspicion of the patient. We do a routine testing of CBC and chest X-ray for all the patients. And then we refer the patient to either an ID consultant or a general physician. If they feel the CBC is altered or the chest X-ray is not fitting into the category, they will do an RT-PCR for the patient before any elective procedure or any essential procedure as of now.
Would you be advising a chest X-ray for any case undergoing surgery? Previously, we used to do it only for GA cases. So
yes,
for any
we are. Yes. Because a CBC, if there is any alteration in your lymphocyte level or in the leukocyte level, you ask for a chest X-ray. If your clinico-radiological picture looks favorable, no issues, you can go ahead with the surgery. If it doesn't fit in, you then can go and ask for testing of the patient. This is about testing, but about the methods or procedure or the personal protective equipment for any aerosol generating procedure, you follow the required PPE like wearing an N95 mask or wearing a face shield, covering your body with a surgery gown, wearing gloves. So this will automatically reduce the risk of transmission because the sensitivity of the testing is also only 70%. Even if the test comes negative, and still we are going to do an aerosol generating procedure, what is going to protect us is only PPE.
Yeah, and now how many hours can you use this PPE at a stretch in the OPD and the OR? I think people were concerned about if they have to go for a meal in between, they want to use the restroom, things like that.
Ideally, the CDC says the extended use of any kind of PPE is allowed for a period of 6 to 8 hours. That is what is the extended use. But if you are going to go to a restroom and coming out, the thing which we can discard is glove. Definitely we should discard the glove where if we go out, use hand hygiene. Mask is you can wear it, use the restroom, come out and you can reuse it. Again, if you are going to have your food or lunch, you can store your PPE in an appropriate area in a breathable bag, like a paper bag, and you can reuse it.
Oh. And now questions about re-sterilization of the N95 masks. Is a plasma sterilizer okay, yes, or can you retain it in a bag? Yeah.
Yes, there are two methods which even the AIMS protocol has come up. The CDC guideline also says about reuse of N95. First, without sterilization, how many times we can reuse it? Maximum 4 to 5 times we can reuse it. Store it in a paper bag with your name labeled on top of it. This is about reusing. Sterilization, recently FDA has approved plasma sterilization, which is nothing but hydrogen peroxide level of sterilization of N95 mask. Maximum, they have mentioned 20 times, but the Sterard company has come up with their guidelines that to the maximum we can use it 2 or 3 times of sterilization, where the N95 mask filterability capacity is retained to 95%. And even the kill power of steroid is around 3 logarithmic reduction of bugs is there. So it is safe to use after sterilization. So we can use it to maximum 2 to 3 times after sterilization. So it is an approved method by FDA.
There is one article which came recently where they have tested UV light, alcohol, also for sterilizing 95 mask. They found it to be quite effective, and they recommend that also can be tried.
Yes, sir. But the alcohol, the problem is the filter efficiency goes by 50%. So the N95 mask, which can filter out 95% of 0.3 microns, it goes to 50%. So only 50% of 0.3 microns will be filtered if we are going to use alcohol. UV radiation, yes, it has got a good sterilization capacity, but the problem is the UV radiation capacity, the duration, the room specification for the UV radiation to happen and exposure is what is difficult to give. So that is where the logistic point of view, which is a difficult in using a UV radiation. Otherwise, if you have a proper UV radiation of 244 nanometer with a controlled environment with an exposure of around 3 feet distance, where it can give a highest level of radiation, UV radiation is also an accepted method. But as of now, we do not have an instrument which can give us that adequate level of radiation exposure.
And finally, a question, since you're a microbiologist, which is lab related. How soon can routine specimens for histopathology, frozen sections and all be started? And is there any specific protocol for processing them?
Yeah, there are, sure, ma'am. I looked into the questions for biochemistry, microbiology, histopathology and frozen section. As far as biochemistry goes, and other microbiology and histopathology, like fixing of the slides or staining the slides, or if it is running an initial sample for hematology, automated analyzers, if those level of standard level of sampling is being carried out, we can follow biosafety level 2. Biosafety level 2 means the healthcare worker has to wear appropriate PPE while handling all the specimens. Appropriate PPE means the person should wear a lab coat, a triple layered mask, and a glove. This is what is needed for a routine sampling and a routine procedures which is happening in the microbiology, biochemistry, or histopathology lab. There are two different procedures which is done in micro or in pathology, like a frozen section, cytopathology, or in microbiology using high risk specimen, that is respiratory specimens, where the aerosolization, if happens, may be a risk factor for the people working around and also the people working on the specimen. If you are going to do a aerosol generating procedure on all these high risk specimen, then better to do it in the biosafety level cabinet 2. It can be class 2 type A1 or type A2 cabinet. So whichever aerosol generating procedure should be done in that biosafety cabinet, and the persons who are going to use the work on the specimens should wear PPE like face shield, mask with a goggle or a separate face shield, a lab coat and glove. This is what is the recommended PPE. If you do not have a biosafety cabinet, then you should go for a full PPE right from N95 mask, face shield, an apron, a full-handed apron and glove. So this is what is recommended. And if you don't have a biosafety cabinet, do not keep more than one person inside the frozen section area.
Yeah. One question for you is, and probably also add to that, is when we examine neonates or very small infants, they cry during the examination. So it is practically an aerosol generating procedure. What protection can we use for the neonate? Because we can't put a mask which the patient would normally wear. So what would you suggest for that?
It's better that we protect ourselves. Better we can wear an N95 mask and face shield. If you are going to examine a neonate or a child whom you cannot control, and for whom you cannot avoid the aerosol generating procedure, in that condition, you can protect yourself with having an upgraded PPE like a N95 mask and face shield.
You say or a face shield or and a face shield?
And a face shield.
And a face shield.
Yes.
Dr. LG, for ROP screening, what would you suggest?
Most ROP screens I am doing are inside NICU. And these are babies who are born and immediately shifted to NICU. The risk of they having had contracted COVID is almost nil. And they're under intensive care of the doctors there. So I'm not taking any special precautions except the usual routine. But the thing is that when I do, I do wear a mask. The indirect ophthalmoscopy itself gives you that 2-meter distance almost from the patient's face. So the chances of anything splashing on you is almost nil. And these babies whom I'm examining and NICU are having something or other like a CPAP or intubated or whatever it is. So the chances again that they are going to cry and produce aerosol is very less. But yes, if it is positive, if you're worried about that, you should use a face screen and examine, no problem. Actually, even the indirect itself is like a half a face shield. The upper half is anyway covered by it, and lower half is covered by a face mask. So the risk really, I would think, is still very, very low. But if you're still worried, you can have a face shield on top of it.
Dr. Ram, would you like to add to that?
No, I think N95 is the way to go along with a face shield to protect your eyes.
Okay. Yeah. So I think we've done with the general questions, the non-ophthalmic questions for Dr. Yamuna. Thank you so much. I would like you to stay on till the end because we have the other questions coming in through the chat box that Shanta has been collecting. And now I'll pass on to Shanta for the ophthalmology part of it.
Good evening, everybody. I think I'll start off straight away with the first question. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
So one of the first questions which was asked is the relationship between conjunctivitis and COVID. A patient who arrives with conjunctivitis, do we assume that this patient is COVID positive and use all precautions required, or is there any way to differentiate between both? Dr. Ram can also take this.
No, I can only talk from the available literature, not with any personal experience, that the incidence of conjunctivitis is actually very, very low, even in the Wuhan series. It was just 2 to 3% of people who came with conjunctivitis. So the chances of a conjunctivitis patient walking into a ophthalmologist clinic with no other COVID symptoms, having actually COVID will be extremely, extremely low. But having said that, even routine conjunctivitis, you do take precautions, don't you? You're not going to examine them like any other normal cataract patient. You take precautions to avoid your fingers from getting contaminated. You avoid using the fingers to lift the eyelid. You can use a cotton bud to lift the eyelid. You can wear gloves. And anyway, you're wearing a mask and your slit lamp has a breath shield. So all these protections you will take automatically anyway. So, but I don't think literature supports that a conjunctivitis patient walking into a clinic of an ophthalmologist with zero symptoms of COVID virus systemically is likely to be a COVID virus. The chances are that he's not. Dr. Ram, you have any point?
Yeah, I agree with you, Dr. LG. My understanding is conjunctivitis is part and parcel of the flu-like illness syndrome. So you got to have fever, cough, sore throat, and with that, you will have a red eye. As far as I know, it does not present exclusively with red eye, as far as I know.
Yes. And in fact, there was one study which was done by one group in Singapore, which is an extension, maybe one of the questions asked subsequently also will be covered by this, is how common is virus in the tears. There are different studies from Wuhan, they have shown about 15%, but there's one study done in Singapore very recently, where they have sequentially collected tears for patients admitted in the COVID ward and compared it with the nasopharyngeal swabs, which are also sequentially collected. And about nearly 5 to 6 specimens in the matter of about 20 days of admission, they found that zero incidence of tears with virus. And these were tested with RT-PCR. So there was none where they could identify virus in the tears multiple times. But each time the nasopharyngeal swab was positive, but the tears were still negative, which tells you that the chances that the virus finds its way into tears is really, really very, very low.
Okay, a question leading on from this, would it be necessary to use gloves for each and every patient, or will cotton buds be sufficient? Is there any particular situation where you would advocate using gloves?
See, when you wear gloves, I always am worried that like in the hotel fellows wearing the plastic gloves and serving food, you tend to forget that the glove surface also gets contaminated, right? And then you start touching everything because you think your fingers are safe. But actually, you're transferring the virus into every object that you see, like that hotel fellow. Again, he will use that gloved finger to touch everything, and again the food again comes back. So that kind of a false sense of complacency will come in. So if you're using glove, also for every patient you should throw it off. You cannot carry over to the next patient if you're using a glove. And even after that, like what Dr. Ram just mentioned, remove the gloves and again go for hand hygiene, go a hand sanitizer. But there's no problem if a normal patient, non-COVID patient, no conjunctivitis, no endophthalmitis comes to the clinic. I don't think we need to become paranoid. You can use your fingers, but immediately after that, you can use the hand sanitizer or wash your hands. If your fingers really get contaminated with the tears of the patient, even routine clinic, even before COVID, I would wash my hands 100% of the times. If your fingers get contaminated, the patient's tears. But if you touch only the upper surface, the skin of the eyelid, then you can use a hand sanitizer, that is fine. But the liquid contamination, I always wash my hands. Dr. Ram? Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
I completely agree with you, sir. The key is hand hygiene. It's not the glove. Completely agree. Gloves give you false sense of protection. It's really for mucous membranes or whether it's blood to protect against blood-borne viruses. Physical exam, I completely agree with Dr. LG said, what he said.
Actually, people from other hospitals are using sterilium to clean the glove, and then they're continuing to use it for the next patient.
Well, you
That's
see,
an absolutely no-no, isn't it?
no, there are shortcuts we make and compromises we make because of lack of availability or cost cutting. If in US, they're not supplying N95 masks to, surgical masks, not even N95 masks. In US, they're asked to use some cloth to cover your face in a hospital. It's because of lack of availability. When in Singapore, when the first this whole thing started in a big bang, there was suddenly surgical mask went out of all the pharmacies. So people didn't have surgical masks. Then even SNEC, they were reusing the surgical mask by folding it backwards and putting it in a sealed envelope and using it for one more day. While when you have it liberally available, you obviously throw off the surgical mask. You're not going to use it the next day. So it's a question of availability versus feasibility, basically. So if you can't afford to throw off a vinyl glove, then maybe you clean it with sanitizer and use it to the next patient. Otherwise, I would throw off a vinyl glove. I would not use it for the next patient at all. The purpose of using a glove is to dispose it.
Request
Dr. Ram,
everyone
would you like to comment on that?
Please.
Yeah, absolutely. Gloves should never go between patients. The purpose of the glove is to protect you from blood-borne viruses, number one. And in this day and age, if you choose to use it for COVID, please get rid of it before it goes to the next patient. And when you get rid of it, you have to use hand hygiene. And for the average ophthalmology exam, where typically you don't have to handle tears or conjunctiva or what Dr. LG said, you just need your hands and scrupulous hand hygiene. If you wear gloves, please throw them away after each individual use.
Thank you. So the next question to you is the routine disinfection for everything that we use in the outpatient department, for example, the applanation tonometer, gonioscope, indirect lenses. Would it be advisable to use the 90D or 78D lenses at the slit lamp as we routinely use? What are your thoughts on that?
You see, even the American Academy of Ophthalmology's recommendations, the routine sterilizing techniques that we use, whether it's a bleach or alcohol, is more than enough to kill the COVID virus. So you don't have to change your techniques of sterilization. What is required is a more religious and diligent disinfection than what we were practicing in the past. I can assure you the complete number of ophthalmologists who would sterilize in between cases the applanation tonometer prism, which is absolutely wrong practice. Now at least they will practice it the way it should be. So all applanting prisms should be sterilized between patients, no doubt. When I start my clinic, the first thing I do is take a large alcohol swab and clean the entire desktop. I clean the keyboard of my computer. I clean the mouse of the computer. I clean the the front surface of the breath shield, which is put on top of the slit lamp. Again, the common mistake you do is you put the breath shield on the slit lamp and forget to clean it every day. Then that becomes a source of infection. Because COVID virus has been known to stick to the plastic up to 72 hours, it has been discovered. So you must clean the front surface and the back surface every day, if not twice a day. Then also clean all the points where people touch. That is the slit lamps. You are only worried about where the patient sits and holds, but you also be worried about where there were other consultants sit and handle. That is the switch of the slit lamp, the tabletop of the slit lamp, even the knob which you use to turn the slit lamp up and down, the knob which you use to open wide the slit lamp beam. All these should be cleaned before you start your first test in the morning. And this is the basic thing I do before I start my clinic. Then, of course, sterilization practice is exactly the same. Regarding use of 78D, 90D lens, I don't think there's any problem because they don't touch the patient and patient is using a mask. So he's not breathing directly into the lens. And since he's not going to touch again another patient, the chance of you transferring infection is very little. If you're really worried, it can be cleaned with alcohol. Even Vogue companies recommends that you can use isopropyl alcohol to clean the lens. What I do is, again, because I handle the rim of the lens, first thing in the morning, I clean the rim of the lens with alcohol. But the lens itself, I don't clean that often. If required, you can always wash it, soap and water, because even that gets cleaned up the virus.
What do you do regarding investigations such as perimetry, OCT? Do you think we should defer this as long as this epidemic lasts?
No,
can we
not
do it
required.
occasionally?
You can do every testing without any problem. The perimetry, you clean that with alcohol, no problem. That's everything is cleanable with alcohol. It doesn't damage the instrument, except for the camera lenses and for the laser machine. I know that there's a lot of discussion whether camera lenses get spoiled. Again, when I searched the net, there was nothing to say that the camera lenses get spoiled by using alcohol occasionally. As for every case, when you keep on rubbing it, it can sometimes remove the coating. But what is recommended is patient is wearing a mask. You should not remove the mask when you are doing the laser, nor when you are doing the fundus photography, in which case the patient is not going to cough onto the laser. So it's very unlikely that the risk of transmission of COVID virus onto the lens is so low that is not really worried, because you're talking about relatively normal people with a few of them maybe asymptomatic carrier, not talking about a COVID patient himself. So I don't think you need to worry about the camera lens nor the laser lens to be getting spoiled.
The other questions are regarding the preoperative evaluation. I think some of them have been covered. But is there any obstetric surgery which you would consider high risk? There is no viremia, as we know. So is there any particular surgery, for example, orbital surgery, PCR?
In the question you said there is no viremia. I think that's a wrong statement in the first place, because the virus has been identified in the serum and plasma of COVID patients. It's not that there's no viremia. There is viremia. It's just that the incidence may be little. I mean, the amount of virus in the plasma and serum that is detectable is probably less, but it is there. Number one. Number two, the aerosol producing is what is strongly mentioned as the risk factor. And if you say that major aerosol producing ophthalmic surgeries are orbital surgeries and sac surgeries because they use bone drill and things like that. In effect, any violently acting motion can produce aerosol. Even vitrectomy machine, vitrectomy probe and phaco probe can produce. But I think, theoretically speaking, it is possible, but practically the amount of aerosol producing is very, very less, because the whole thing is inside the eye, the movement is not outside the eye. But yes, having said that, if you say it's aerosol producing, yes, it is. You take all the precautions. If you are worried about it, use N95 mask, no problem. In fact, I wanted to share with you one of the pictures sent to me by one of my colleagues from Kuala Lumpur. The type of precautions people are taking for doing ophthalmic surgery. I'm not talking about general surgery or major surgeries, but even ophthalmic surgery is ranging from people who do not follow anything beyond what they were routinely practicing, all the way to, in UK, they are using FTP3, means even more than N95 mask. That is the kind of mask they're using. And in Kuala Lumpur, that lady, their unit has also recommended use of a tent, a plastic tent attached to the microscope, so that the whatever comes out, gases come out from the patient are restricted to the tent and don't get distributed to the general atmosphere. Plus, then the negative pressure is being recommended for all patients for surgery. I don't understand why, but these are all extremes. I don't think anything as like a standard guideline is present, and so we are going by our own intuitive behavior rather than because there's a firm evidence that if you follow these practices, the incidence is vastly reduced, and if you don't follow, the incidence is increased. It is really not so. Dr. Ram, do you have any comment on that?
No, I totally agree with you. Your comment on viral load is perfectly true. About 2% of patients have detectable viral RNA compared to 70 to 80% from a positive respiratory specimen. So that I agree with you, and obviously you're best placed to comment on the ophthalmic aspects.
The next question is, in situations where a bilateral surgery is required, for example, congenital glaucoma or pediatric cataract surgeries, in certain situations, should we perform bilateral surgery instead of putting the patient at risk?
What exactly is the rationale? Because once you've decided he is not a COVID patient, only you're taking up for surgery, right? He's not a known COVID patient. Then whatever your rationale is there for doing bilateral surgery in the past is what should apply here. There's no reason why we should change the rationale just because the environment is a COVID sensitive environment, not that the patient is a known COVID patient. It's a different matter. If you're operating on a COVID patient, then all precautions, everything will be totally different. But you're operating on a so-called in your assumption normal patient. It's just that the environment is a COVID sensitive environment, that's all. I won't change my rationale for doing bilateral surgery simultaneously. Bilateral intravitreal injections, again, there are many hospitals where they routinely give bilateral intravitreal injections even in the past. So if that is your practice, you can continue to do it. There is no need for changing the practice just because it is a COVID sensitive environment. That would be my call. I'm not again talking from any literature support, is just my call.
For routine surgeries done under local anesthesia, would an N95 mask with goggles be sufficient, or should we use a face shield also? Because I think it will be difficult to operate using a face shield.
Again, the advantage for ophthalmic surgery is very often we are placed a little, there's something coming in between us and the patient's eye, which is the operating microscope. So the chances that things will splash on our face is very less. So which is why field is not important when you're operating with an operating microscope. For those of you who are not operating with a microscope, like some squint surgeons don't use microscope, or orbital surgery, etc., they should definitely use a shield. But for ophthalmic surgery, for glaucoma surgery or cataract surgery and VR surgery, I don't put on a shield at all. Although I just wanted to show you this model before you shoot to me by the hospital, which we are supposed to use for all interventional procedures, including surgeries. So some people use, on top of their glasses, they use these goggles, even when there is operating microscope in between. I was not using it as a routine, but if it makes you feel comfortable, you can do these goggles along with on top of your own spectacles as well. But otherwise, I don't think there's anything different. N95 mask is optional. It's not compulsory again, but if you want to use N95 mask, you feel good about it, definitely use it. The problem with N95 mask is if you're operating a long surgery, after a while, you start feeling giddy. In fact, I was doing a surgery today after a very bad diabetic TRD. It took me about 2.5 hours. Halfway through, I really felt giddy with the N95 mask. I changed it to regular mask and operated. But yes, if you feel comfortable about it, please go ahead. No problem.
Regarding penetrating keratoplasty, can we go ahead with this surgery now, or should we ask for the donor to be, whether the donor was tested for COVID before proceeding? Should we postpone it until?
Frankly, I have no answer. I have no answer whether it can survive a cornea, donor cornea, which is kept in a preservative medium. Will it survive? I have no idea. We'll have to really look for alternative answers.
Dr. Ram, do you have a comment on that? About
actually, the whole issue of transplant in any organ, solid organ, say a kidney transplant, liver transplant, lung transplant, that itself we are not clear exactly what to do. Because if it's an asymptomatic patient, whether to take that organ or not. Similarly, even blood banking, we are not exactly clear whether to accept asymptomatic blood donors. We can't manage without blood. So I think common sense guidelines are more than enough. If the procedure can wait for a month or two till we get better literature, better studies and guidelines, then wait. That's what I would suggest.
Can I just talk for a minute, Dr. Shanta?
yes.
So I was just reading up some reports. Apparently, there has been just one coroner who had received coronavirus while retrieving the blood, while receiving the cornea. Otherwise, there has been no incidence of spread of this coronavirus to any of these other people. The problem with the corneal donation comes when, because you are going to a place, probably there are other people with the coronavirus and not necessarily the patient alone. So far, there has been no literature of corona transfer from the from the donor to the anybody. Of course, there's still no literature evidence on that. So probably we are a little safe, and we can look into this and start retrieving corneas as soon as, when we can consider this as an emergency as such. Because as soon as we are going to get the OPD running fully, we are going to really need donor corneas. So I don't know whether the Eye Bank Association of America has given very clear guidelines as to when not to retrieve the cornea. So they put it in red alert, green alert, and yellow alert when you do not retrieve the cornea. So as of now, even they have, Eye Bank Association of America has stopped retrieving corneas, but they're looking into actually ease the guidelines, I suppose. So we don't have anything of that line.
Thank you. I think that covers most of the eye-related questions. There were some comments which came up during the talks. So I will take up whatever general questions have been asked, and Dr. Munna will take up the ophthalmic questions which have been asked. Most of the questions are SN operational. So let me tell everybody that we are creating standard operating procedures which will be sent to everybody, and that will answer most of the questions which have been asked. Some of the questions which need to be covered, there are questions about the development of the vaccine. Is there any information as to how soon this will come, or is it a question of at least 2 years?
Yeah, perhaps 2 years, maybe in a year's time minimum. Nobody expects that a vaccine will be available within 1 year. So we just have to wait, and we still don't know whether that vaccine will confer long-lasting immunity, etc., whether the virus will mutate by the time they devise an effective vaccine. So for the next 1 year, we just have to do social distancing and all the other infection control measures we are discussing.
The second question is, once a patient has been affected with COVID, how safe it is for them to get back to work? 14 days, 28 days?
14 days is the answer. If you have confirmed COVID, the government will ask for 2 negative PCRs before they let you back to work. Unfortunately, sometimes you can be PCR positive, shedding this virus for long periods of time. Having said that, there is a good study saying that after 8 days, you are no longer culture positive. So whatever you're seeing in terms of a positive PCR is probably DNA from a dead virus, sorry, RNA from a dead virus, but we can't prove that. So as of now, till your 2 negative PCRs are positive, if that is, 2 negative PCRs, if that is before day 14, wait till day 14 and go back to work.
What about COVID contacts? Is the quarantine 14 days or 28 days for them?
It is 14 days.
If you have contact with the COVID positive patient.
Correct. Government of India guidelines, ICMR guidelines is 14 days.
The next question was, if the patient is being taken up for major surgeries, should a chest X-ray be done preoperatively to see if there's been some evidence of, for example, would asymptomatic patients have any evidence? I don't think so, right?
Yeah, but I think if you're going to give general anesthesia, then that is an aerosol generating procedure. And I think it's reasonable to do a blood count and a chest X-ray, as Dr. Yamuna said. These are relatively low-cost interventions. Anyway, if you're going to give somebody GA, you probably need that from a general anesthetic risk standpoint. So I think these are low-cost interventions. Remember, testing pre-op is not easy. There is no official sanction for this. ICMR does not permit it. So either you will have to lie on the form or you'll have to get around it somehow. And it doesn't change what you do. If you're COVID negative, you have to still take the same precautions. So these are the problems with routine pre-op testing. It's easy to say that, but no lab, even Apollo, we are not licensed. We can do COVID testing only for inpatients. We are not licensed for outpatient testing.
Thank you. I think those are the general questions which had been added as comments. Now I think if Munna can add whatever she has gone through.
Yeah, there was a question on intraocular pressure check in babies for Dr. LG.
What is the question about? Why
Intraocular pressure in babies?
I think you can use the Tonopen or eye care.
Oh. And question on whether to clean the slit lamp with bacillocid or 1% hypochlorite. I think there's a lot of talk on 1% hypochlorite for the equipment, probably because of cost issues.
The 1% hypochlorite is actually erosive material. So 70% alcohol is more than enough for any non-enveloped viruses. So that would be favorable. The usage of either 1% sodium hypochlorite or alcohol depends on the compatibility of the equipment which you use. If it is compatible, you can go with 1% sodium hypochlorite. But if it is going to be erosive to that particular equipment, you can go with 70% alcohol also. So both are equally good.
Yeah, okay. This was not a question, but I think a very important comment is neither you or the patient should be talking when you're examining the patient to minimize the aerosol. This was not a question, but I thought this was an important comment.
Well, I think if you're wearing a mask, then the mask will filter out all large droplets. I mean, you have to talk to patients. You have to get history and you have to tell them.
Examining with the indirect ophthalmoscope because you're close to the patient at that.
I think the best part of this COVID problem is that a lot of good things will get incorporated in your routine practice. That is a good hand hygiene between patients and the hygiene of cleaning the slit lamp, chin rest and headband, and the way the patients hold onto the slit lamp between every patient. So these good practices will come into our routine, and I think that's what is important.
And how frequently should the eye shields be cleaned? That was a question. The face shields.
I think
it again depends upon the.
Yeah, please go ahead.
This is actually depends upon the availability of your face shields. If your face shields are available widely for one complete day, you can use one face shield and throw it. But if the availability, the resources is constrained, you can clean up the face shield with 70% alcohol and reuse it.
That's at the end of the
day. Yes. Most of the products as of now available is not reusable, but still want of resources to conserve resources, we are looking into practices of reusing. If we are looking in those levels, yes, you can reuse it by disinfecting it with 70% alcohol.
I would say the frequency with which you disinfect it would depend upon your usage. If you are potentially you think that there are patients who are coughing in front of you or there's a sneezing in front of you, you're worried about the shield being covered with a lot of organisms, you clean it once more. After cleaning with alcohol, that doesn't take more than half a minute and you do it.
Yeah, and one question was, when you operate a patient, do you do it under ambulatory or does the patient stay? Because if you do it ambulatory, he goes home, comes, and it's another visit.
No, I think ambulatory is definitely recommended compared to admissions because, number one, when they're admitted, they get exposed to a lot of people around them. And you also need to employ more staff. What you want to do in this kind of situation now is to reduce the number of people in the building, both staff as well as the patients. You don't want the patients and attendant just to stay in the hospital for nothing. You do surgery, let them stay for a short period and go back home. All cases should be ambulatory. There's no reason why it should not be ambulatory, even for complex vitreoretinal surgeries. At least in MDH, no case is admitted unless they have a serious systemic problem which needs to be followed by the internist. Otherwise, for ophthalmic purpose, any case, whether it's in the GA or a 3-hour surgery or 4-hour surgery, they are discharged, they are asked to go home.
There was a question regarding the use of an extra HEPA filter in the OT. Dr. Yamuna?
Usually, the class A OTs always have HEPA filters. Even if they do not have HEPA filters and the amount of air exchangers, as I mentioned, is around 15 to 20, that is more than enough. The purpose of HEPA filter is to bring in clean air from the external environment inside the OT. So that is actually the purpose of HEPA filter. So if air exchanges are good, there is no mandatory requirement of HEPA filter.
Yeah, and a concern about the air conditioning in the labs. This was a question that came from the labs. So they're worried about central air conditioning in the labs. Should they be concerned or is there something specific to be?
As I mentioned, ma'am, if any aerosol generating procedures are to be carried out in lab, it has to happen inside the biosafety cabinet. So if that has been taken care, there is no issue of transmitting these viruses within the lab, even if we have a common air handling unit.
And probably this question would be to Dr. Ram. I know you have repeatedly told us that asymptomatic patients do not need COVID testing, but there was a question for patients on chronic immunosuppressive therapy. Do they need to be tested?
No, just continue your chronic immunosuppressive therapy in somebody who is already on it and who needs it. If somebody is at high risk and you're planning to start, then you probably should push that off by 1 or 2 months if their eye condition allows. But somebody on it, please don't stop it. There is no reason to stop it for COVID reasons.
Okay. So I think we are done with the non-operational questions. So thanks to all the 3 panelists for being so informative and receptive to our questions. I leave it to Dr. Girish to wind up the session.
I think before I propose the vote of thanks, I would like to just ask the panelists if they have certain comments to make over and above the questions that we have asked. If you feel that we have missed out on something which is important.
Okay, I'll go first. I think the first thing that you need to do when you start seeing COVID patients is you are going to need to maintain social distancing in your outpatient clinic. Now, that is obviously going to be difficult because SN is a popular referral eye hospital. You're going to see crowds coming back when you reopen your hospital, just like Apollo. And how do you maintain the distance? You'll have to cut waiting times. You'll have to leave one seat blank between each other. You'll have to see the patients quickly, get them out quickly. So you'll have to be much more efficient in those regards. So those are going to be some challenges when you restart because you want to make sure you see only non-COVID cases at your hospital. You've got to have an efficient system at triage so that the slightest fever, slightest cough does not even set foot at your hospital. They are referred to somebody to rule out COVID, only then they come back. So those are going to be challenges when you first start till the system gets into motion.
One more additional point which I want to add is the multi-dose eye drops which you may be using in the OP areas. So maybe that may be taught to the people or the technical staff. How are they going to handle it? How are they going to store it back? I mean, obviously they will be following all the standard precautions, but during this process of COVID, where we see 2 or 3 people with eye infection, the virus present in tears, maybe we should be careful with those kind of multi-dose ophthalmic solutions when they use it.
There's one point I would like to make, that the minims which are available elsewhere in the world are not freely available in India. So if you have to waste one vial for one patient, it becomes very, very unmanageable, very impracticable. So
not wasting, sir. We need to teach the staff.
No, what I mean is ideally what you said is correct. That is, if you open one vial for one patient, you don't use it for another patient. But even in Western countries, if in a normal practice, normal people use one vial for multiple patients for dilating the pupil. While for patients who are like a post-operative case or some other infections, then we use minims, which are one patient, one small bit you use and throw it off. But minims are not available in India. So it becomes a very impractical problem, or a practical problem to have one vial for one patient. So yes, you should maybe install it in such a way that there is no way they can contaminate the tip of the nozzle of the dropper. So that is, as you said, we should teach the people who are installing the drops. Maybe only trained nurses to install the drops, and not everybody. Any secretary, new secretary should not be putting the drops.
Yes.
And maybe, okay, maybe if we have finished some points, I thought I will add to what Dr. Ram said about, since space is a constraint in any hospital in India, at least for some time to come, till the acute phase is over, a rapid turnover of patients is required, and consultants cannot afford to make the patients wait, because there is a practice that the workup will be done, so they will come about 2 hours later and then start examining the patients very quickly. So that kind of practice should totally go away. If 8 o'clock appointments are given, you will be there by 7:45 and start disposing of the patients even before they arrive. Not they should be made to wait for a long time. and avoid unnecessary investigations. Maybe in the normal academic environment, we would like to do a lot of tests because we want to document it. Maybe these can wait until this phase is over, maybe after another 5-6 months, then you can order. So avoid all unnecessary tests and avoid unnecessary cross consultation. It is a common practice, but it's a little bit of discolor you send to a neuro-ophthalmologist, a little bit of 21 pressure you send to glaucoma specialist. That should go. What you should do is instead from the consultation room, if you have a doubt which can be easily clarified by just talking to a person, talk to a consultant of the specialty and say, of this patient, do you need to see? If they say, I don't need to see, send the patient back. Don't unnecessarily send the patient for cross consultations. And a continuous interaction with the patient should be restricted to less than 15 minutes. So don't keep the patient in the room and keep on talking for a very long time. So make sure that you send the patient out before about 15 minutes is over. Because as I said, that is a limit they say, which increases the risk of infection if fever, TB, actually going out COVID virus. And one attendant per patient, of course, should be very strictly enforced. These are some of the recommendations based upon my experience at Sankha Nethralaya. I hope if the things have changed now, my sincere apologies for having brought up these issues.
No, sir, we haven't changed. Okay, I think there are no more comments from the panelists. So actually, we were quite tense, facing the post-COVID OP. It was almost like facing final exam, one unit exam, not knowing what kind of questions the COVID will throw to us, but I'm sure that all the answers that the panelists have given, we'll be a little more confident facing our patients whenever we start our OP.
There's only one disclaimer I would give Dr. Girish. The disclaimer is that Dr. Ram Gopal is an infectious disease specialist. Dr. Yamuna is a microbiologist, etc., etc. I am nobody. So I probably don't fit into the panel at all. So I spoke as a general ophthalmologist with practicing what everybody else practices. So I'm really honored that you have given me an opportunity to share the dais with two real specialists. I'm not a specialist. I'm a pseudo specialist.
Yes, sir. For us, you are everybody. You are the pan ophthalmologist if SN has ever produced one. So my sincere thanks to LG sir, Dr. Ram Gopal Krishnan and Dr. Yamuna Devi for their valuable inputs for this webinar. I'm sure we'll be now coming out with a little more comprehensive SOP. I'll be sharing it with the COVID team as well as the HODs. They'll vet it. And in the next few days, we'll share it with everyone. We'll also be having a training session directed to the consultants, residents, optometrists, and the staff before they actually set foot on the campus post 3rd of May, hopefully. And the final note, rather worrisome developments that we have been hearing on the news about attacks on healthcare workers and even on the service providers. This is very, very unfortunate. I think some of you must have seen a very nice write-up by Dr. LG, which is posted in the social media. So I request all our colleagues to join in the white alert, which the IMA of India has called tomorrow at 9 p.m. Please join in with your family and also encourage your friends and other neighbors to join in to show our solidarity with this group and to mark our protest against this kind of senseless violence. And I also request you to please share on the various social media platforms our strongest condemnation for these kind of violence. Hopefully, sense will prevail in the days to come. Once again, sincere thanks. And,
thank you very much, Angesh.
Thank you
everybody for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.